Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the gilded cage of European royalty, specifically the Habsburg dynasty, the bloodline that ruled half of Europe for centuries and gave us magnificent palaces, diplomatic marriages, and the subtle art of maintaining imperial dignity while your jaw makes eating super engineering challenge. So before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these historical deep dives. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what dynasty you think had it worse than the Habsburgs. It's always fascinating to see the global perspective on royal genetics gone wrong. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a cup of tea for that authentic aristocratic vibe, and let's step into the silk-lined nightmare of concentrated bloodlines together. So, you think you understand what it meant to be Habsburg royalty? That it was all crowns and conquests and living in palaces, precious? Really? Like assuming that owning a sports car means you automatically know how to drive stick shift while blindfolded. Tonight, you're not just learning about the Habsburgs, you're living as one. You're waking up in the Hofburg Palace in 1700, staring into a mirror that reflects not just your face, but the faces of a dozen ancestors who all happen to look suspiciously similar. Because when your family tree resembles a telephone pole more than an actual tree, genetics gets creative. You're about to experience what it really meant when they said, keeping it in the family became less suggestion and more architectural blueprint for an entire dynasty. You wake up in the Hofburg Palace, Vienna, 1700. The silk sheets beneath you cost more than most peasants see in a lifetime, but they can't cushion the weight of your bloodline. You are Archduke Leopold Joseph, and your family tree doesn't branch so much as it loops back on itself like a pretzel designed by someone who'd never seen a pretzel. Your reflection stares back from the polished silver mirror, and you recognize the features immediately. Not because they're yours, but because they're everyone's. The prominent lower jaw that juts forward like the prow of a ship. The drooping lower lip that makes speaking clearly a daily challenge. The elongated face that painters struggle to flatter, no matter how much gold you pay them. These aren't just your features. They're your father's, your mother's, your grandfather's, your great-aunts. When your family commissioned portraits, the artist basically painted the same face over and over again, adjusting only for gender and the occasional mustache. You attempt to break your fast, which is always an adventure. The Habsburg jaw, that magnificent mandibular monument to centuries of strategic marriages, makes chewing a complex engineering problem. You've learned to approach food from specific angles, like a siege warfare specialist attacking a particularly stubborn fortress. The servants pretend not to notice when you struggle with harder breads, though they've learned to serve everything pre-cut into manageable portions. Your dignity demands that you never acknowledge this accommodation, so you maintain the fiction that you simply prefer your meat in conveniently small cubes. Your valet, Johann, has been with your family for decades. He's watched 3 generations navigate the same daily challenges with the stoic patience of a man who understands that royal genetics are not his department. He helps you into your ceremonial dress, the one with enough gold thread to fund a small war, and you catch him checking the fit around your increasingly prominent abdomen. The Habsburg tendency toward corpulence isn't just about rich food and sedentary lifestyle. It's another gift from your ancestors, wrapped in velvet and delivered with a bow. The morning briefing arrives with your secretary, Count von Harrach, who speaks slowly and clearly because he knows your hearing isn't what it should be. Another family trait, passed down with the same reliability as the crown jewels. He updates you on the latest diplomatic correspondence, and you nod thoughtfully, though half the nuances escape you. Your tutors did their best, but when your bloodline has been folding in on itself for 2 centuries, intellectual sharpness isn't exactly the inheritance you received. You study the family genealogy charts that line your private study, and they read like a mathematical proof that someone fundamentally misunderstood how genetics work. Your great-great-grandfather Philip Ty married his niece. Their son married his cousin. Their daughter married her uncle. Your own parents were first cousins, which the church approved because royal blood must remain pure. Pure of what, exactly, was never clearly defined, but impurities apparently included things like genetic diversity and the ability to chew normally. The Spanish branch of your family tree makes your Austrian line look practically cosmopolitan by comparison. Your cousin Charles II of Spain, may God rest his soul, couldn't even produce an heir despite 2 marriages. The poor man's jaw was so pronounced that his teeth never met, making eating a negotiation between determination and physics. His tongue was allegedly so large that his speech was barely comprehensible, and his mental faculties never quite developed past those of a child. Yet he ruled an empire that spanned continents. Because bloodline trumped competence in the Habsburg playbook. You remember the family gathering from 5 years ago, when the Austrian and Spanish branches met to discuss the succession crisis brewing in Madrid. Looking around that dinner table was like attending a very expensive costume party, where everyone forgot they were supposed to dress as different people. The same long faces, the same protruding jaws, the same pale eyes staring back at you from every direction. Your cousin Maria Theresa had to leave the table twice to compose herself, though whether from emotion or the physical difficulty of consuming the soup course was diplomatically never discussed. The family physician, Dr. Frankie, makes his weekly visit. He's a discreet man who understands that royal health is a matter of state security. He examines your legs, which have been troubling you lately. The Habsburg tendency toward weak circulation is becoming more pronounced with each generation, and you've noticed that your feet often feel cold even in summer. He prescribes his usual remedies, bloodletting, herbal tonics, and rest. Though you both know these are mostly theatre, what you really need is a grandfather who wasn't also your great-uncle, but that ship sailed about 6 generations ago. Your correspondence includes a letter from your sister Maria Josepha, who married the Duke of Bavaria last year. Her wedding was celebrated as a diplomatic triumph, though the Duke is also your second cousin, so the gene pool remains disappointingly shallow. She writes cheerfully about her new life, though reading between the lines reveals the familiar struggles. She mentions adjusting to new routines, around meals and finding accommodating social circles, who don't stare too obviously at her distinctive profile. The afternoon brings a meeting with your financial advisors, who brief you on the cost of maintaining royal dignity across a sprawling empire. The numbers are staggering, but then again, so is the expectation that you'll personally embody centuries of dynastic power. Your ceremonial obligations alone require dozens of specially tailored outfits, each designed to accommodate your family's distinctive physique while projecting imperial authority. The wigmakers, tailors, and bootmakers who serve the Habsburg court have essentially created an entire industry around the challenge of making your bloodline look regal. You review marriage proposals that have arrived from various European courts. The negotiations are delicate dances around bloodline compatibility and political advantage. Your advisors present genealogical charts that look like mathematical equations, calculating degrees of consanguinity with the precision of astronomers mapping planetary orbits. Too close, and even the church box. Too distant, and you risk diluting the royal essence that supposedly flows through Habsburg veins like liquid gold. The irony isn't lost on you that your family's obsession with purity has produced the opposite of perfection. Each generation seems to concentrate the challenges rather than the strengths. Your great-grandfather was reasonably healthy and quite intelligent. Your grandfather struggled with gout and had difficulty with complex decisions. Your father required assistance with basic correspondence and spent most of his reign delegating to capable ministers. You find yourself somewhere in the middle of this declining trajectory, competent enough to fulfill ceremonial duties, but increasingly dependent on advisors for substantive governance. Evening brings the daily ritual of court dinner, where you sit at the head of a table surrounded by nobles who've learned to navigate the complex etiquette of dining with royalty whose anatomy doesn't cooperate with conventional eating. Conversations flow around you, carefully steered away from topics that might require rapid or complex responses. Your courtiers have become masters of the art of meaningful nods and strategic silences, allowing you to participate in discussions without exposing the limitations that everyone politely pretends not to notice. The entertainment tonight features a chamber orchestra performing pieces specifically chosen for their soothing qualities. Loud or complex music tends to overwhelm your sensitive hearing, another gift from your ancestors. The musicians have learned to adjust their dynamics, creating performances that accommodate royal genetics while maintaining artistic integrity. It's a delicate balance, like everything else in your life. Your childhood tutor, Father Benedict, visits regularly to discuss philosophy and theology. He's one of the few people who remembers you before the weight of dynastic expectation settled fully on your shoulders. He speaks of the Habsburg mission to defend Catholic Europe, the divine right that flows through your bloodline, the sacred duty to preserve traditions that stretch back centuries. His words are meant to inspire, but they also remind you that you're not just yourself. You're the culmination of a genetic experiment that prioritized political power over biological wisdom. The palace library contains detailed medical texts that you're not supposed to read, but curiosity drives you to study them anyway. The anatomical drawings show normal human jaw structure, normal limb proportions, normal organ placement. You compare these to your own reflection and wonder what might have been if your ancestors had occasionally married outside their immediate family circle. But such thoughts are dangerous, bordering on treasonous. To question the Habsburg breeding strategy is to question divine providence itself. Your dreams are populated by faces that all look familiar because they all look like yours. Sometimes you dream of conversations with ancestors you've never met, but whose features you recognize from portraits lining the palace corridors. They speak of duty and sacrifice, of preserving bloodlines and maintaining power. But they also whisper of the costs, the compromises, the gradual accumulation of physical challenges that each generation passes to the next like a carefully wrapped gift nobody wants to open. The morning routine begins again, and you face the mirror with the same mix of resignation and determination that has characterized your family for generations. Today brings meetings with ambassadors, correspondence with distant relatives, and the endless administrative details of ruling an empire that spans from Austria to the Americas. Your physical limitations mean you rely heavily on capable ministers, but your bloodline provides the legitimacy that makes their authority possible. Your personal physician updates your medical file, a document that reads like a case study in the long-term consequences of genealogical isolation. The notes mention recurring respiratory issues, digestive difficulties, circulatory problems, and the gradual onset of symptoms that seem to be appearing earlier with each Habsburg generation. He recommends treatments that are really just management strategies, ways to maintain function despite anatomy that seems designed by committee. The family portrait painter arrives for your annual sitting, and you assume the poses that have become standard for Habsburg nobility, the angle that minimizes the jaw protrusion, the clothing that camouflages physical awkwardness, the expression of serene authority that masks the daily struggle of existing in a body shaped by centuries of genetic compromise. The artist works with practiced skill, creating an image that suggests imperial majesty while tactfully omitting the more challenging details. Your sister writes from Munich, describing her first pregnancy with a mixture of joy and apprehension. She doesn't explicitly mention her fears, but you understand them without explanation. Will this child inherit the family gifts or the family curses? Will the next generation find the balance even more difficult to maintain? These are questions that haunt every Habsburg parent, though they're never discussed openly. Royal bloodlines don't acknowledge doubt. The Spanish succession crisis dominates your diplomatic correspondence. Your cousin Charles II died without an heir, leaving the vast Spanish Empire in dynastic limbo. The various European powers circle like vultures, each advancing genealogical claims based on marriages that trace back through the same tangled family tree. You study the succession charts and realize that every potential claimant is related to you in at least 3 different ways. This is what happens when a continent's royal families intermarry for 2 centuries. Everyone is everyone's cousin. Your ministers brief you on the military situation. The Habsburg armies remain formidable, though you notice that fewer family members are taking active command roles. The physical demands of campaigning don't accommodate the accumulated anatomical challenges of your bloodline. Your generals are increasingly drawn from loyal noble families rather than direct Habsburg relatives, which raises questions about the long-term viability of personal dynastic rule. The evening brings correspondence from the Pope, who offers prayers for your health and the continued success of the Habsburg mission to defend Catholic Europe. His Holiness has been dealing with your family for generations, blessing marriages that would have been scandalous in any other context. The Church's accommodation of royal genetics represents a pragmatic compromise between theological principles and political necessity. God's will apparently includes protecting bloodlines that defy biological common sense. You examine the family medical records that your physicians maintain with scientific precision. The data shows clear patterns emerging over generations. Heights are decreasing. Fertility rates are declining. Physical anomalies are becoming more pronounced. Mental capacities are showing signs of stress. It's as if your family tree is conducting a long-term experiment in genetic concentration, and the results are becoming increasingly clear. Your cousin Leopold I writes from Prague, describing similar challenges in the Bohemian branch of the family. His son shows promise intellectually, but struggles with the physical demands of royal representation. The boy's jaw requires specially prepared foods, and his hearing difficulties make public speeches challenging. Yet he's being groomed to inherit territories that stretch across Central Europe, because bloodline succession doesn't pause for biological inconvenience. The court jeweler presents new pieces designed specifically for your family's anatomical requirements. The coronation crown has been modified with additional padding to accommodate your skull shape. The ceremonial collars are designed with broader dimensions to fit comfortably around Habsburg neck proportions. Even your jewelry must be customized to work with genetics that prioritized purity over practicality. Your personal correspondence includes letters from distant relatives across Europe, all sharing variations of the same challenges. The French branch mentions digestive difficulties. The Italian cousins report circulation problems. The German relations describe respiratory issues. It's like receiving updates from a medical study that's been running for 2 centuries, with your family as the unwitting test subjects. The afternoon brings a meeting with architects planning renovations to the palace. The Habsburg residences have gradually been modified to accommodate the family's changing needs. Doorways are slightly wider. Stairs have more frequent landing areas. Dining rooms are designed with specific acoustic properties to help with hearing difficulties. The buildings themselves have evolved to work with royal genetics rather than against them. Your confessor, Father Augustine, listens to your weekly confession with the patience of a man who understands that royal souls carry burdens beyond the typical catalogue of sins. He offers absolution for pride, for moments of doubt about divine providence, for the occasional flash of resentment toward ancestors whose matrimonial choices echo through generations. His penances are gentle, acknowledging that your physical existence is already a form of suffering that requires no additional burden. The family genealogist presents updated charts that trace Habsburg bloodlines back to their origins in Switzerland. The early generations show robust health, intellectual vigor, and physical capability. But somewhere around the 4th generation, the pattern changes. Marriages become increasingly internal. The gene pool shrinks. The portraits begin showing familiar facial features, appearing with suspicious regularity. It's like watching a slow-motion biological disaster unfold across centuries. Your dinner conversation includes updates from the Spanish territories, where administrators struggle to govern vast empires without direct Habsburg oversight. The physical demands of travel across Atlantic distances exceed what your family's constitution can reliably handle. This creates a management crisis that no previous generation had to address. How do you maintain personal dynastic rule when your person can't reliably function in the required contexts? The evening entertainment features a reading from family chronicles that celebrate Habsburg achievements across centuries. The narrator recounts military victories, territorial acquisitions, and diplomatic triumphs with the enthusiasm of someone who doesn't have to live with the biological costs of those achievements. Each success required marriages that consolidated power while concentrating genetic challenges. Every triumph came with anatomical consequences that compound across generations. Your personal servant helps you prepare for sleep, a process that requires accommodating various physical limitations that have become routine over the years. The specially designed bed that supports circulation problems. The positioned pillows that help with respiratory difficulties. the temperature controls that compensate for circulation issues. Even your sleep requires engineering solutions that previous generations never needed. The night brings dreams populated by children you'll never have, descendants who might have inherited Habsburg determination without Habsburg anatomy. You imagine branches of the family tree that might have grown differently, marriages that prioritized biological compatibility alongside political advantage. But these are fantasy genealogies, alternative histories that exist only in the realm of sleep and speculation. Morning returns with the familiar routine of managing royal existence despite anatomy that wasn't designed for the job. Your reflection shows the accumulated weight of centuries of genealogical decisions made by ancestors who prioritized immediate political gain over long-term biological consequences. Each generation made choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but created compound interest in genetic challenges. The family physician reviews your medical history with the thoroughness of a scientist documenting a multi-generational experiment. Your file represents decades of data about the long-term consequences of genealogical isolation. The patterns are clear, the trends are undeniable, and the trajectory suggests that future generations will face even greater challenges. Yet the political system remains committed to bloodline succession regardless of biological costs. Your morning correspondence includes reports from Habsburg territories across Europe, each requiring decisions that you're increasingly unable to make without substantial assistance. The administrative demands of empire exceed what your accumulated physical and cognitive limitations can reliably handle. This creates a governance crisis that threatens the foundations of personal dynastic rule. The court historian presents research on previous Habsburg rulers, documenting the gradual evolution of physical and mental capabilities across generations. The early emperors were personally involved in military campaigns, diplomatic negotiations, and complex administrative decisions. But each generation shows increased reliance on advisors, ministers, and bureaucratic intermediaries. The royal person remains essential for legitimacy, but actual governance has quietly shifted to others. Your lunch preparation requires the same careful attention to anatomical reality that characterizes every aspect of your existence. The kitchen staff has perfected techniques for creating meals that provide proper nutrition while accommodating digestive limitations and jaw functionality. Even your sustenance must be engineered to work with genetics that prioritized political considerations over biological practicality. The afternoon brings visitors from various European courts, each carefully briefed on protocols for interacting with Habsburg royalty. They've learned to speak slowly and clearly, to avoid complex conversational topics, and to maintain dignified composure when confronted with the accumulated physical consequences of centuries of strategic intermarriage. Diplomacy itself has evolved to accommodate royal genetics rather than challenge them. Your personal chaplain conducts evening prayers that include specific petitions for the Habsburg bloodline, the continuation of divine favor, and the strength to fulfill dynastic obligations despite physical limitations. The prayers acknowledge, without explicitly stating, that your family's existence represents a theological puzzle about divine will and human biology. How does God's plan accommodate genetics that seem to work against their own purposes? The palace corridors echo with the footsteps of servants who've learned to navigate the complex requirements of maintaining Habsburg dignity across generations of increasing physical challenge. The entire court system has gradually adapted to support royal genetics rather than expect royal genetics to support the system. It's an impressive feat of institutional evolution, but it raises questions about sustainability. Your evening routine includes reviewing correspondence from marriage negotiations that will determine the next generation's genetic inheritance. The proposals arrive with genealogical charts that calculate degrees of relationship with mathematical precision, seeking the optimal balance between political advantage and biological risk. But the options remain limited by the same considerations that created your current circumstances. The family's accumulated medical knowledge represents a unique database of information about the long-term consequences of genetic concentration. Your physicians have become specialists in managing the biological effects of genealogical isolation, developing treatments and accommodations that no previous medical tradition had to address. It's cutting-edge healthcare for problems that shouldn't exist. Your personal reflection time brings confrontation with the reality that you represent both the pinnacle and the decline of Habsburg achievement. The bloodline that created one of history's most powerful dynasties has simultaneously created genetic challenges that threaten its continuation. Each generation must balance the preservation of political power against the accumulation of biological costs. The night servants prepare your sleeping quarters with the same attention to anatomical accommodation that characterizes every aspect of palace life. The building itself has become a support system for royal genetics, modified and adapted across generations to work with bloodline limitations rather than against them. Even your architecture must acknowledge biological reality. Your dreams include conversations with future generations who will inherit both Habsburg legacy and Habsburg anatomy. They ask questions about choices made by previous generations, decisions that seemed reasonable at the time but created compound consequences across centuries. These are discussions that will never happen in waking life, but they populate your sleep with genetic accountability. The morning cycle begins again with the same mixture of determination and resignation that has characterized Habsburg existence for generations. Your reflection shows features that connect you to centuries of ancestors, while simultaneously demonstrating the accumulated costs of their matrimonial strategies. Each generation has faced the same choice between biological wisdom and political necessity. Your correspondence includes updates from family branches across Europe, each reporting variations of the same challenges while maintaining the public fiction that Habsburg genetics represent divine favor rather than biological compromise. The letters describe accommodation strategies, medical management techniques, and diplomatic workarounds that allow royal bloodlines to continue functioning despite anatomy that works against their purposes. The family's educational system has evolved to work with rather than against the intellectual limitations that have accompanied physical challenges across generations. Your tutors developed specialized techniques for royal instruction, creating learning environments that accommodate shortened attention spans, hearing difficulties, and processing challenges. Even your education must be customized to work with concentrated genetics. Your daily administrative duties require constant collaboration with ministers who understand that effective governance means working through rather than despite royal limitations. The Habsburg system has gradually shifted from personal rule to institutional rule, with the royal person serving as legitimizing symbol rather than active decision maker. It's a remarkable adaptation, but it fundamentally changes the nature of monarchy. The afternoon brings correspondence from physicians across Europe who study Habsburg medical history as a unique case study in the long-term consequences of genetic isolation. Your family has inadvertently contributed to medical science by demonstrating what happens when bloodlines concentrate over centuries. The knowledge gained might prevent similar problems in other contexts, though it comes too late to help your generation. Your evening meal requires the same careful orchestration that characterizes every aspect of your existence. The dining experience must accommodate your limitations, digestive sensitivities, and swallowing difficulties while maintaining the dignity expected of imperial dining. Even your nutrition requires engineering solutions that previous generations never needed to consider. The court's entertainment programming has evolved to work with royal sensory limitations rather than challenge them. Musical performances use specific frequencies and volumes that accommodate Habsburg hearing patterns. Theatrical presentations avoid complex plots that might overwhelm limited attention spans. Even your leisure must be customized to work with concentrated genetics. Your personal relationships exist within the constraints imposed by genetic reality and dynastic expectations. Potential marriage partners must navigate the same genealogical calculations that have shaped Habsburg unions for centuries. Romance becomes secondary to genetic compatibility, which itself has become increasingly problematic as the available gene pool continues to shrink. The family's religious observances include special prayers for bloodline continuation, divine intervention in genetic matters, and strength to fulfill royal obligations despite physical limitations. The Habsburg relationship with God has become complicated by the apparent conflict between divine favor and biological reality. How do you reconcile religious duty with genetics that seem to work against their own purposes? Your correspondence with other European rulers reveals the delicate diplomatic dance required to maintain Habsburg prestige while acknowledging biological limitations. Foreign courts have learned to conduct business through intermediaries, accommodate communication difficulties, and maintain ceremonial respect for royal persons who can't reliably fulfill traditional royal functions. The palace's daily operations represent a complex support system designed to maintain Habsburg dignity despite anatomy that challenges conventional royal behavior. Hundreds of servants, advisors, and specialists work together to create an environment where concentrated genetics can function effectively enough to preserve dynastic legitimacy. Your medical care represents the most advanced knowledge available about managing the long-term consequences of genetic concentration. The Habsburg court physicians have become specialists in a field that technically shouldn't exist, developing treatments for conditions that result from genealogical decisions made centuries earlier. It's cutting-edge medicine for problems created by political necessity. The family's architectural legacy includes buildings modified across generations to accommodate changing Habsburg anatomy. Palace doorways, furniture dimensions, and room proportions have gradually evolved to work with royal genetics rather than challenge them. Even your physical environment has adapted to support concentrated bloodlines. Your educational background includes specialized instruction in managing royal existence despite physical limitations, diplomatic techniques that work around communication difficulties, and administrative strategies that accommodate cognitive challenges. The Habsburg curriculum has evolved to prepare rulers for the realities of governing with genetics that prioritize political legitimacy over biological functionality. The evening brings reflection on the accumulated weight of centuries of genealogical decisions made by ancestors who couldn't have predicted their long-term consequences. Each generation made choices that seemed reasonable within their historical context, but created compound effects that subsequent generations must manage. The biological costs of political power have become increasingly clear across time. Your personal servants understand that maintaining Habsburg dignity requires constant accommodation of physical realities that previous generations never had to address. The daily routine of royal existence has become a complex choreography designed to work with rather than against the anatomical consequences of genetic concentration. The family's correspondence networks maintain communication across European Habsburg territories while accommodating the communication difficulties that have become increasingly common across generations. Letters are written with specific consideration for reading challenges, and diplomatic protocols account for response delays caused by cognitive processing limitations. Your relationship with Habsburg legacy remains complex, combining pride in dynastic achievement with awareness of the biological costs that achievement required. The bloodline that created one of history's most powerful empires has simultaneously created genetic challenges that threaten the continuation of that same power. The night cycle brings dreams populated by alternative histories where Habsburg marriage strategies might have evolved differently, creating bloodlines that maintain political power without concentrating genetic challenges. These are speculative genealogies that exist only in sleep, offering glimpses of paths not taken and choices not made. Morning returns with the familiar routine of managing imperial existence despite anatomy that wasn't designed for the demands of ruling vast territories across multiple continents. Your reflection shows features that connect you to centuries of Habsburg achievement, while simultaneously demonstrating the accumulated biological costs of that achievement. The daily cycle continues with the same mixture of determination and adaptation that has characterized Habsburg existence across generations of increasing physical challenge. Each day requires navigating the complex balance between maintaining dynastic dignity and acknowledging biological reality, between preserving political power and managing genetic consequences. Your existence represents both the culmination and the crisis of Habsburg ambition, demonstrating both the remarkable achievements possible through concentrated bloodlines and the ultimate limitations imposed by genetic isolation. The dynasty that conquered continents has been conquered by its own chromosomes, creating a legacy that includes both unprecedented power and unprecedented biological challenge. The Habsburg story continues through your daily existence, each routine demonstrating the complex relationship between political necessity and genetic reality, between dynastic ambition and biological consequence, between the preservation of power and the cost of that preservation measured in accumulated anatomical challenges passed from generation to generation like carefully wrapped gifts that nobody wants to open but everyone must accept.